Fuck you, Steve. My name's Sean Siford. I live here in Hamilton, as I have for about 3 and a bit years now. My wife and I moved here in 2018. Prior to that, I've lived just about everywhere under the sun. I was in Toronto for a few years. I was kind of coast to coast in Canada. My parents were military, so I did that when I was growing up. And then along the way, I ended up moving stateside, living in kind of Boston area, LA, New York, Atlanta, list goes on. As far as what I do for a job, I'm a creative director at an agency. So as far as what that means in terms of band shit is, I'll design merch and shit sometimes. Other than that, I play in a band called Sound Systematics with Shane that you've interviewed before. I play guitar in that band. I am now working on another project that I can't say a lot about because there's not a whole lot to say, but I'll be doing vocals in that thing. And it'll feel pretty good to do. Steve's giving me the finger, so this is where I fuck off. Fuck you, Steve. So I guess what got me into a lot of it, I started out with a lot of kids on AM radio gold stuff, particularly Motown. Got me really into music, and a lot of the concepts translate to punk. I mean, the kind of straight on songs from the heart, 4/4 time, that sort of stuff. So that was my jumping off point. And growing up, my dad always was super into comedy. So like we had all those records, right? Your Richard Pryor, Robin Williams, your George Carlins, et cetera, et cetera. So that kind of scathing review of society was kind of built in for me at a young age. From there, it probably went on to the old Columbia House, the CD thing, getting like anthology CDs of like MC5 and Ramones and stuff like that. At probably 8 or 9 years old, and when I was 12, I went to school with a kid whose older brother was into a lot of punk rock stuff, and he gave me a mixtape at one point in time because I was just getting into like skateboarding and all that sort of stuff. This was 1992, 93. And he gave me a cassette, and on the cassette on the one side it was a bunch of Bad Brain self-titled stuff, random select tracks from Victim in Pain. The flip side was all Sham and Discharge, and that was kind of it, right? So from that point, like there wasn't, that was kind of the era when punk rock was kicking off with your Green Days and all that sort of stuff. That was big, big media and that sort of shit. And but for me, I kind of just fell into it really, really strangely. It wasn't even the way of like some people got into it via like Nirvana or whatever was going on, grunge stuff and all that sort of thing. And that didn't catch me. I didn't really appreciate any of that stuff until well later on. But for me, it was jumping from the MC5 straight into Sailing On, and that was that for me. Fuck you, Steve.
Put those in there.
I know, you should.
First one.
Comics were always huge for me, as I'd mentioned prior. I mean, like growing up on those records, like that was a lot of the vinyl we had in our house. Like my dad had, your, like I said, your Deep Purples, your MC5s, your whatever, those kind of old rock and roll bands. But comedy was huge, right? And that kind of like anti-system outlook, just ended up proliferating through a lot. And even like, the hard work ethic of a lot of that sort of stuff. Like those guys all lived rather intense lives, and it came out through those records. But like I took as much from that as I ever did from music. There was just a tremendous amount there, both in terms of like kind of just escaping life shit, but also just that, again, the inspiration of those records was huge. Musically, again, like, Motown is in OK and Stax and all those, like, those records that have some real soul to them. All that stuff rang true for me, right? Like it really anchored itself in punk. It found its kind of way through that, coming across punk and oi and hardcore and all that sort of stuff. What was only natural progression for me, right? Like, and even when I got into the punk side of things and the sheer diversity of sound of stuff that can all just be encapsulated in one genre. You know, you end up with a situation like, even you look at like a microcosm of that music, something like when you get into Oi specifically, and you look at a band like The Crack that were just prolific songwriters, you know, just incredible musicians, wrote brilliant songs, you know, great transitions, great compositions, producing records the same time as the Cockney Rejects, who got by sheer intensity alone, right? Whether or not they could play their music all that well at the time just didn't fucking matter. They just got through on rage, and it was great to see that sort of stuff really play out, because you see that dichotomy about, you know, something can be so kind of heart driven, you know, and at the same time you can have something that's musically beautiful, whether it's recognized or not. Like I said, like The Crack being one of those bands that's just historically under-recognized for what they could do. And they were a huge inspiration, because even with me, when it came to stuff like Oi and hardcore and punk, I like the rudimentary shit, I like the aggressive shit, but I can't stay there. You know, there's got to be some stuff that's interesting and you can really sink your teeth into. Otherwise, it's just the same fucking record 15 times. And why does anybody want to listen to that shit? Fuck you, Steve. I got to keep this trend rolling, my man. First show, I couldn't tell you if I wanted to. It was probably just some community event where there was like some shit local band covering REO Speedwagon or something. After that, when I was young, like in my early teens, I would come down to Toronto. At the time, my parents were stationed in North Bay. And I would come around. There were some shows that would kick off here and there up that way, but not a whole hell of a lot going on in the kind of early through mid '90s. But I remember, you know, bands like Blundermen and Maryland's Vitamins and stuff like that of the era, which was great. As far as my first, like, you know, show that I really remember having some sort of impact was a show in Syracuse that I lied to my parents to be able to go to, telling them that I was at you know, a friend's place for a sleepover or whatever the case may be, and it was I was with my friend, but it was myself and his older brother, the same guy who gave me the tape I discussed earlier. You know, him driving us down to Syracuse to go see Sick of It All and Black Train Jack. So that was the first thing that really cemented it, and I had no fucking clue what was going on and felt real out of place and had no idea what the hell was happening. But you know, it was great. Like, I mean, that was the thing that really I suppose kicked it off and cemented shit for me. You know, just everything that went on, whether it's the, you know, the aggressive nature of it, or just this like weird, you know, ragtag bunch of people that were at these shows. I mean, it was the '90s, so you had just every weird fucking person you could think of under the sun, all culminating under whatever the hell you wanted to call punk rock at the time. So yeah, that was the first one that I remember that was really of worth noting. Fuck you, Steve. Favorite shows. I mean, there's ones that obviously stand out just as moments of like triumph. You know, I mean, like finally seeing Coxbar in 2016, having waited 25 years or whatever the hell it had been to do so. That was great. You know, seeing the Buzzcocks a few years back, the Stranglers put on one of the greatest shows I've probably ever seen. You know, all great. I'll try to focus on a couple here. The first one that comes to mind is Tear It Up, Striking Distance, and Desperate Measures at the Vera Project in Seattle. I think it was 2001, might have been 2002. That show was pretty innocuous. Like, it wasn't, it didn't seem like it was going to be anything significant, and it really wasn't, I suppose. I mean, I love Tear It Up to a great degree, so it was great for that purpose. Show was relatively empty. Only because Terror was coming to town later that week, and all the good little mosh boys and girls had to get their gym exercises in before they went out. So there was only probably you know, maybe 20 people at this entire place, and one of whom is a now disgraced edgeman from a rather notorious band or notable band named after a sportswear company that I don't need to dig into. But watching this particular individual dance his way headfirst into a wall and damn near knock himself out. That was just fucking brilliant. I mean, even now, looking back at it now, I wish he had. I mean, but so that was great. I mean, Tear It Up was incredible, as would be expected. They were just absolutely off the fucking wall. As far as next in line, I would probably say Chain of Strength reunion at the Revelation Records 25th anniversary in New York. I went to the LA shows as well. They were great. Different in that New York. I mean, it's New York in October. It was fucking cold by comparison. But that particular night with Chain playing was just crazy. Like, there was just this insane energy in the air, and everybody was really just waiting to lose their fucking minds. They were just spot on. Like, it was as it is recorded. It was just incredible. They played. They covered Can I Say, which watching Chain of Strength do a Dag song was just fucking nuts. I'm pretty sure I wrecked a few vertebrae at that show. On the topic of Dag, seeing Dag Nasty, Sean Brown lineup, because I'm one of the few people on earth that actually thinks the Sean Brown lineup's superior to the Dave Smalley one. I don't care what fucking Steve says. But I just love that there's just an intensity to those records, to his voice, to the way that those tracks are done. There's this fucking DC hardcore urgency that I find just doesn't quite exist on the Smalley stuff. I'm not talking shit on the Smalley. It's good. It's just not as good to me. Beyond that, Steve's still giving me the finger in case you wanted to know what the fuck's happening off camera. I'm trying to think of what else really stands out in my mind. There's been a ton, and as I get older, it gets a lot harder to remember this shit. Now there's been a clip because my old fucking brain doesn't remember things. So the last one that I can think of is actually a recent show. Is right before the pandemic happened. Myself and Shane and my wife and his wife Rose drove down to Pittsburgh to see Royal Hounds and Chubby and the Gang. I hadn't been on a road trip in a long time for a show, and we just decided to do it last minute. We went down there. Pittsburgh I've always had love for. It's a tremendous kind of working class town, but it's also it's a beautiful city. Shows there are fantastic. I hadn't been in way too long. So we went. It was at the Rock Room, which is in a great kind of little fucking industrial part of town. Cops don't bother with it, and it don't bother with cops. We went, like, I went being a fan of Royal Hounds and obviously Chubby and the Gang, and I gotta say, like, I mean, Royal Hounds put on a set that I will probably never forget. The Sound is a band that's kind of loosely associated with Oi, but they have as much in tune with a band like Leatherface as they do with any of the kind of Oi inspiration stuff. But there was such heart and such just, I don't know, everybody had a smile on their face. It was just such an incredible show. Sadly, Simo, their bassist, he has passed throughout the duration of during COVID. So rest in peace, Simo. But beyond that, I'm looking forward to going down to New York and being able to say goodbye to him and Royal Hounds here coming up in January. So hopefully that one's as good as the Pittsburgh one was, and I'm sure it will be. Fuck you, Steve. So past and current bands. Previously, like a lot of people that, when I was in my teen years and that sort of thing, played a lot of bands that didn't fucking matter and never did anything, and it's not really worth discussing. So, bounced around doing that sort of stuff, and after I kind of moved to a few different places, I ended up back in Western Canada for a little bit. I played in a band called On the Brink, which were on Long Shot Records, fairly prominent, I suppose, at the time. Canadian kind of punk and oi label. So I did that for a little bit, and obviously right before we did a recording, I fucked off because I was tired of being, at the time anyway, punk rock broke. So, I did that. And I guess shortly before that, I was in a band when I lived out in Montreal called Sincerely Yours, which did absolutely nothing aside from one very, very violent show. I guess the only thing of note from that, Liam, the drummer from that band, went on to front Cancer Bats at some point. So I guess that's something. But for the most part, it was just a way for 5 people who fucking hated each other to play music that people probably also fucking hated. You know, beyond that, so like, and then I took probably 15 years off playing music. I haven't done anything for a long time. Until recently, when Shane suckered me into playing in his Rocksteady band, which is called Sound Systematics. So we're kind of plugging away at that sort of stuff right now. Aside from that, I've got a new project on the go that I won't say too much about, mostly because there's not a whole lot of story to tell yet. But it's something that I've kind of wanted to do for a long time. So we'll see how that goes, but it feels weird to be playing music again. I sort of hate myself, but I'm getting by, and it's as enjoyable as I make it. And fuck you, Steve. Craziest shit I've seen at a show. I mean, we've all seen nutty shit. If you've been around, kicking around shows long enough. I mean, my de facto answer on this sort of thing is usually like, if you've ever seen a Haymaker show, you've seen some shit, and that's pretty much where that stands. Aside from that, like as far as punk shows go, like the couple times that I went to like, backyard shows in East LA was just fucking chaos, of the best kind. But just Google that shit, you'll see what I mean. Aside from, all that, I mean, the craziest thing that I've probably ever personally been part of in a show wasn't a punk rock show at all. In 2013, I had the pleasure of contributing an art piece to the 20th anniversary of Wu-Tang Clan's release of 36 Chambers on the Lower East Side in New York. So I went down there, which was a trip enough, just kind of booting around the Lower East Side, doing all that sort of stuff with some of those guys. The night of the actual art show, and at the time, I mean, I had no business being there. There were people that were far more accomplished than I was. I just got lucky. But as we're kind of getting ready for everything, I was upstairs in the office at the venue that the show was going on, and I was just sitting by myself. At the time, I was doing some additional work for Wu-Tang, specifically around like their website and shit like that. Anyway, I was sitting on the sofa in the office upstairs, and there is in front of me a very large bronze bust of ODB. Which enough was just staring at that was off-putting enough, because it was incredibly well done and huge. And then as I'm sitting there at one point, RZA walks into the room. We're the only 2 people in the room. He shuts the door behind him and he sits on a chair to the left of me and just leans down and starts staring at this head. And he didn't say a fucking word. I just sat there, silent, unwilling to move, because I'm not going to do anything with this guy having a moment. That was his cousin. It's either have that sort of thing, and I'm just holding my fucking breath and hoping he doesn't ask anything of me. Eventually, he gets up and leaves the room, and I think it took me probably a good minute and a half or 2 minutes to get my shit together to figure out what the fuck had just happened. But I look back and I remember it now. It was a really, really fucking weird moment, and not weird violent, not weird anything else like that. Just a strange fucking thing to be a part of. Fuck you, Steve. Likes and dislikes for when it comes to being a musician. Likes is, I mean, just the creative output when it comes down to it, right? Like, I mean, being able to get that sort of stuff out, whether it's aggression, whether it's rage, whether it's and it's some sort of viewpoint that you just feel it necessary to get out in the world, like that shit. Being able to do it yourself and just make it whatever the fuck you want is pretty incredible. And there's not a whole lot of other areas that you can do that in quite the same way with a group of people, whether or not you like them. Which leads me to the next part, which is the worst part about being a musician, and just probably people. It's great. Like, I love playing shows. I loved all those sorts of things. Some of the in-between shit was a little bit much. You sit in a van for 3 weeks or whatever the case may be with some individuals who have very very aggressive or strong personalities and maybe not the greatest hygiene on the planet, and that shit can grow old pretty fucking fast. Eating just absolute trash food and whatever the hell it is that you need to do to get by, and you can look back and you romanticize that sort of stuff, but it fucking sucks then and it fucking sucks now. Fuck you, Steve. Useless talent. I'll keep it short and sweet. Neither of my thumbs bend at this top joint. Don't know why. That was just the way that I was born. But both thumbs do this and all sorts of this. And I've never lost a fucking thumb more in my life. Fuck you, Steve. Favorite food? Tacos, because tacos are fucking delicious. But not like, white people frilly fucking frou-frou tacos. Like, places like the Mule and all that sort of shit. I mean, the food's good. That's not a fucking taco. That's not what I'm talking about. Like El Momo in East LA, great tacos if you're ever in fucking East LA. Same sort of thing, Mexican, sidewalk vendor tacos in Mexico City, which if you have never gone to Mexico City, I can't stress enough how much you need to go. Aside from that, the glory that is Taco Bell, because Taco Bell is fucking fantastic. Steve, let's go. Dan Caselli, you can fuck yourself. You're not invited. And if it's not tacos, it's going to be hot dogs, because hot dogs are absolutely fucking fantastic. But those are the two top foods. And thanks for doing this, Steve, and fuck you, Dan.